guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Claire and today I just wanted to go over my most used YouTube resources as somebody who writes genre fiction and is seeking to traditionally publish my book. There are quite a few channels out there that specifically have resources or advice onto how to get into this traditional publishing world. Now, there are plenty of others that are self-publishing specific, but since I am seeking to go through the query process for a literary agent to sell to an editor at a major publishing house, you know, those are the channels that anything that has that sort of advice, that's what I'm seeking. And if you like this sort of video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe. That really helps me out. I am pushing to reach 1K this year so I can finally monetize my channel. Enough of that and let's get going. All right, so the first channel that I'm gonna recommend I don't think will be a surprise to anybody that is very passionate about fantasy writing in general, and that is Brandon Sanderson's BYU, specifically his 2020 lecture series. Brandon Sanderson is probably the top fantasy writer, if not at the bare minimum, the most prolific fantasy writer right now, and he's been doing these BYU lectures for years. You can find videos on YouTube dating back to like 2014, maybe even like 2013 or 2012, but he came out and actually published on his own channel his 2020 BYU lecture series, and they're fantastic, especially if you are passionate about writing in the fantasy genre. And he talks so much about like what makes good character arts, multi-POVs, magic systems, different types of magic systems like hard versus soft, world building. I find him so likable and charismatic as a teacher. I also like that this actually takes place in a classroom, a real classroom, because students will ask questions and some of them are genuinely really good. The only thing that I do find to be a little bit lacking, and that's okay because the other channels that I'm going to mention totally make up for this, but Brandon Sanderson is a hyper successful author, has been hyper successful for a while, and he broke into the industry back in the early 2000s. And he admits this, he's very out of touch with how new authors break into the industry. He even said that he didn't have to turn in a query letter. He was terrible with query letters. He sent his manuscript to an editor directly, and like these are all things that you just can't get away with nowadays. And so it's fun to hear about, definitely how he gets into the industry, but that was like 20 years ago. But on a writerly level, especially on a fantasy level, I mean, he does talk a lot about magic systems, and I'm actually not somebody that's writing particularly a hard magic system. It definitely leans more on the mystical end, but he talks about that too and how you can make that work, or like things to do in that regard. It's just a fantastic series, and it's one that I tend to listen to more than once. It comes from somebody that I can trust. It's like, okay, clearly Brandon Sanderson, top fantasy author of our time, I trust when you tell me your advice on these things. My next top channel, and I've mentioned her so many times before too because I've been watching her for years, she specifically talks about genre fiction, YA, traditional publishing, and she has gotten into the nitty-gritty behind the scenes info that is really useful for us on the outside, and that is Alexa Dunn. She specifically writes YA sci-fi, but now is kind of switching into YA thrillers, but she has been in traditional publishing. She talks about how she has queried 2 books before her 3rd book finally getting picked up, so she has a lot of extremely useful information about querying contracts with your literary agent. She has an interview with her literary agent. She also talks about how it is to sell to an editor, what that process is like. I also really like her videos on querying. She says that she loves query letters, and query letters are so difficult, and she has so many videos about them. I think she actually just had one recently where she reads a bunch of successful query letters in different genres. She's constantly putting out videos. She's a very prolific YouTuber, which I love. And she also has a lot of general writing advice videos. It's much more about how to level up your writing. She also just has a great way of getting across information that's very personable, easy to consume. Alexa Dunn is by far one of the top author tubers out there. She's fantastic. And she also was a part of a authortube group slash podcasting trio that no longer is putting out episodes, which is just the saddest thing in the world. They were called Novelty. So they had podcasts, and then they would also throw up their streams, their discussions on YouTube. Me and my friend used to listen to them every time they dropped an episode and then discuss what they talked about. One, I just love the dynamic of having multiple writers talking about their different process. All three of them are in YA and speculative fiction, so fantasy or sci-fi. And while Alexa was already published, these other two were seeking to be traditionally published, and they clearly had a lot of knowledge and passion about the industry. I've also listened to basically every episode multiple times. They basically haven't put a new one out since like early 2020. Maybe that will change in the future. I hope so. I loved them. But if you haven't listened to any of their episodes, then you have a nice little back catalog to go through. One of my favorite things that they do is read through people's query letters. They get sent some query letters and they'll read them and they'll discuss them. And while none of them are literary agents, I just find that to be so useful as somebody that if you want to seek traditional publishing, if you want to get a literary agent, you have to go through the querying process, and that is not easy. That is not a skill a lot of us inherently have, especially if we're in something like fantasy. We're used to making our stuff rather long, not condensing it down to one page. And so listening to them read out different queries, discuss different queries, I find that to be such a treat. Another YouTuber that does that is IWriterly. I believe her name is Meg or Megan. Her channel is specific to genre, speculative fiction, mostly fantasy and sci-fi. But the interesting thing about her is that she used to be a literary agent. So she is very familiar with the traditional side of the publishing industry, but she is currently in the midst of self-publishing a book. So she has a lot more self-publishing videos coming out. So if you're more interested in that realm, she has a bunch of information about that. And specifically because she was a literary agent, she is also another one that talks a lot about query letters, that will critique query letters. I think those are her best episodes, and I really like hearing like, okay, what is it that makes you keep reading? What is it that would make you reach out to that author? She does have a ton of interviews with different authors, editors, literary agents. She talks a lot about behind the scenes in the traditional publishing world, talks a lot about why readers may lose interest in your manuscript, why literary agents or editors may reject your manuscript. She is somebody that implores and suggests to use sensitivity readers, which I morally object to. So the next channel that I'm going to suggest for good writing advice is a little bit more out there, and that is Uler. I love his videos on an entertainment level, but as a student of fiction writing, the ones that I would implore you guys to look at are his insanely long 3-part Star Wars The Force Awakens takedown series, where he literally spends like 3 hours each video going basically minute by minute on the Star Wars Force Awakens movie, basically talking about why it's terrible and why it doesn't work. I've also watched this series multiple times, and his Last Jedi ones, mwah, and his Game of Thrones Season 8 takedown videos, mwah, mwah, mwah. They're so good. But the Star Wars ones focus a little bit less on being like entertaining and really hyper-focused on the writing. Granted, this is script writing versus book writing, but I think the advice that he gives is incredible, and he talks a lot about craft, he talks a lot about dialogue, what makes a dynamic scene, wanting to keep a story consistent, wanting to keep character motivations consistent, something that is, to me anyway, wildly entertaining, but you're also learning a lot as you consume it. And the last YouTuber I'm going to talk about is Shadowversity. He is a self-published fantasy novelist, and I would say a lot of his videos hyper focus on the historical accuracy of the medieval times, talking a lot about armor and castle structures and all that kind of jazz, which can be extremely useful if that is kind of the era of your fantasy universe. And he doesn't have a ton of videos about this topic, but he does have quite a few about writing fantasy books. He also critiques some of his subscribers' queries, and I think he does a really good job of breaking it down. I do wish that he spent even more time talking about that kind of stuff, because he's somebody that you can tell really enjoys teaching. The way he talks about writing, there's been like a few things, even though he doesn't have a ton of videos about it, little nuggets that I've picked up that I've never heard from anybody else, or rather he just says in a way that really clicks with my brain. He is somebody that hyper focuses on internal world consistency and kind of complex magic systems, which I can respect and I can still glean very useful advice from. That doesn't quite translate into what I'm working on personally, but like I said, there's still advice there that I have found to be extraordinary for me. And I do like that he is somebody that really respects the fantasy genre and is clearly very passionate about accuracy and historical accuracy, and who loves to do research and really wants his viewers to do research on their stuff to make it the best that it can be. There's just a lot about him that I find to be very useful. So let me know down in the comments below if these are channels that you already watch, or if you have any other writing oriented channels that you think will be really helpful for people. Again, keep in mind that basically all the ones that I talked about, especially the first three, do deal with traditional publishing, but if you have any self-publishing focused channels that you think would be really useful for others, definitely leave them down below. But anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope this helps you on your writing and publishing journey. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you all next time. Bye!